Welcome to the Module 1 of Severe Acute Respiratory Infection, or SARI, Treatment Facility Design. Module 1 provides an overview of basic operational and infection prevention and control principle in COVID-19 context. By the end of this lecture, you will be able to describe the public health objective at all stages of preparedness and response plan, identify ventilation and exhausted air treatment as IPC measure within a COVID-19 context, and explain the different mode of transmission and apply a rational use of PPE. The modules is organized in 3 different sections. First is public health objective and strategic priority by scenario, ventilation and exhausted air treatment as IPC measure, and mode of transmission and rational use of PPE. Currently, countries are experiencing one or more of this epidemiological scenario. Country with no case, country with 1 case or more, imported or locally acquired. Country experiencing cluster of cases in time, geographic location or common exposure, and country experiencing larger outbreaks of local transmission with community-based transmission. Major intervention should be put in place immediately and then scale up according to the epidemiological scenario. For the first scenario, country with no case, country should set up screening and triage protocol at all points of access to the healthcare system, including primary healthcare center, clinic, hospitals, emergency unit, and ad hoc community setting, and set up COVID-19 designated wards in existing healthcare facility and prepare for the next scenario. For the second scenario, in addition to screening and triage facility, country should designate specific COVID-19 treatment center in order to admit all the possible cases and prepare for the next scenario. With the third scenario, with cluster of cases, country should then surge by repurposing ward or intensive care unit into COVID-19 wards and hospital, identify and designate community facility for isolation of mild and moderate cases, and plan for new structure to augment the health system capacity. For the first scenario with transmission at the community level, country should then set up new hospital or in temporary structure or permanent structure to augment COVID-19 patient care. It can be a new construction or through repurposing an existing building into a treatment center. The referral pathway changes well according to the different scenario. During the introduction and localized transmission scenario, suspected COVID-19 patient can be identified at primary care screening and referred to the hospital where a dedicated COVID-19 ward has been designated. When reaching the community transmission scenario with the opening of a dedicated SARI treatment center, the referral pathway changes accordingly, and all suspected and confirmed COVID-19 patients will then be referred to the treatment center. Where health facility can no longer manage patients with mild or moderate disease, isolated patients who are not at risk for severe disease, people younger than 60 years old with no comorbidity disease, either in community facility like stadio, gymnasium, hotel or tent that can be repurposed into a community facility with access to rapid health service via adjacent dedicated COVID health post, telemedicine, or at home according to WHO guidance. Surge capacity is the ability of an health system to meet an increased demand for health service. It is dependent on a well-functioning incident management system and entail human resource management, especially staffing, supply, equipment, logistic and resupply mechanism, specific expertise for critical area of care, and overall management of hospital resources such as expanding space and premises. Planning for surge capacity should allow for progressive scale-up of activity over several stages with clearly defined activation threshold for each stage. A severe acute respiratory infection treatment center flexibility and extension plan should be an integral part of the surge capacity, moving from a severity categorization to a cohorting approach as well, enabled to quickly respond to changing transmission dynamic and increase the total bed capacity. If needed, big facility can be used to set up cohorted wards for severe and critical patients. Existing building can be repurposed and prefabricated facility adapted to meet the minimum required in order to use it at SARI treatment center. The purpose of ventilation is to provide healthy air from breathing by both diluting the pollutant originating in the building and removing the pollutant from it. Building ventilation has three basic elements. Ventilation rate, the amount of outdoor air that is provided into the space, and the quality of the outdoor air. Airflow direction means the overall airflow direction in a building, which should be from clean zone to dirty zone, and air distribution or airflow pattern. The external air should be delivered to each part of the space in an efficient manner, and the airborne polluant generated in each part of the space should be also removed in an efficient manner. There are three different methods that can be used to ventilate a building. Natural ventilation, where natural force like wind drive outdoor air through the building openings such as window, doors, solar chimney, wind tower, and trickle ventilators. Mechanical ventilation, where mechanical fans drive mechanical ventilation. Fans can either be installed directly in window or walls or installed in an air duct for supplying air into or exhausting air from a room. And then a mixed, the hybrid ventilation, which relies on natural driving force to provide the desired design, flow rate, and it can use mechanical ventilation when the natural ventilation flow rate is too slow. The decision whether to use mechanical or natural ventilation for infection control should be based on needs and availability of the resource and the cost of the system to provide the best control to counteract the risk. However, if the stable specific ventilation and exhausted air treatment system are proposed for each one of the service or area existing in the treatment center. Airflow should always move from clean to more dirty zone and in a top-down direction in order to reduce the risk of nosocomial infection. Using a air extractor will easily allow for control of the ventilation rate, meeting the air change per hour standard required and assuring a constant unidirectional top-down airflow. In warm climate country, due to temperature and pressure, the airflow will naturally move to the opposite direction. For this reason, it is essential that the air extractor is turned on whenever there is a patient in the room. Air from the room can be exhausted directly to the outdoor, where the droplet nuclei will be diluted in the outdoor air. It's essential to exhaust the airway from air intake vent, person and animal. If, for any structural reason, dilution is not possible, exhausted air should pass through a special high-efficiency particulate air filter, HEPA filter, that removes most of the droplet nuclei. HEPA filter is a type of plated mechanical air filter. It is an acronym for high-efficiency particulate air filter. This type of air filter can theoretically remove at least 99.97% of dust, pollen, mold, bacteria, and any airborne particle with a size of 0.3 micron. In order to simplify the installation, reducing the construction time and assuring proper air treatment, facility may benefit from the use of portable HEPA filter unit equipped with the proper fitting ducting to exhaust air from a selected room to create the required ventilation flow rate and exhausted air treatment as well. Another option is UVGI, is ultraviolet germicidal irradiation. is an electromagnetic radiation that can destroy the ability of microorganisms to reproduce by causing photochemical change in nucleic acids. UVGI is not recommended as a standalone system, but only as complementary of EPI filtration in case of higher recirculation. Because the clinical effectiveness of UV system may vary, UVGI is not recommended for air management prior to air recirculation from airborne isolation room. It is also not recommended as a substitute for HEPA filtration locus of air to the outside or negative pressure, but as a complementary system only. The traditional epidemiological model holds that infectious disease results from the interaction of agent, host, and environment. More specifically, transmission occurs when the agent leaves its reservoir or host through a portal of exit, is conveyed by some mode of transmission, and enters through an appropriate portal of entry to infect a susceptible host. This sequence is called chain of infection. For infection to spread, all these links must be connected. And infection prevention and control goal is to break the link in the chain to prevent the transfer of the pathogens. An infectious agent might be transmitted from its natural reservoir to a susceptible host in a different way. There are different classifications for mode of transmission. COVID-19 transmission can occur through three different modes. Direct contact, which occur through direct physical transfer between a susceptible host and an infected person, or through indirect contact, which refers to a personal contact between a susceptible host and a contaminated intermediate object, usually inanimate. Through droplet by inhalation of infective large particle via close contact with an infected patient sneezing or coughing. Or airborne, but only when performing aerosol-generating procedures such as tracheal intubation, non-invasive ventilation. COVID-19 is not an airborne virus, but can be aerosolized during this specific medical activity. The current global stockpile of PPE is insufficient, particularly for medical mask and respiratory. The supply of gun and Google is soon expected to be insufficient also. Surging global demand, driven not only by the number of COVID-19 cases, but also by misinformation, panic buying, and stockpile, will result in a further shortage of PPE globally. In view of the global PPE shortage, the following strategy can facilitate optimal PPE availability: coordinated PPE supply chain, use of PPE appropriately, and minimize PPE needs. Within a COVID-19 facility, this strategy can be implemented through the use of physical barrier to reduce exposure to the virus, such as glass or plastic windows, as shown in the image. This approach can be implemented in area of the healthcare setting where patients will first present, such as triage area, the registration desk, and at the emergency department or the pharmacy window where medication is collected. Administrative measures as well, such as restricting healthcare workers from entering the room of SARI patient if they are not involved in direct care, considering bundling activity to minimize the number of times a room is entered, for instance, checking vital signs during medication administration or have food delivered by healthcare workers while they are performing other care, and plan which activities will be performed at the bedside.
Welcome to Module 2, Designing SARI Screening Area and Treatment Center. By the end of this lecture, you will be able to identify the basic principles and layout of a COVID-19 screening point for healthcare facilities, describe how to set up a SARI treatment center, and also be able to describe how to set up a SARI treatment center using tents. The lecture is organized in 3 different sections for easy understanding. Section 2A looks at basic principles and layout of a COVID-19 screening point for healthcare facilities. 2B, setting up a SARI treatment center, and 2C is about SARI treatment center in tents. Module 2A, basic principles and layout of a COVID-19 screening point for healthcare facilities. Screening and clinical triage includes a system for assessing all patients at admission, allowing for early recognition of possible COVID-19 and immediate isolation of patients with suspected disease in an area separate from other patients. To facilitate the early identification of cases, establish a proper screening system at all different levels of a public health system to enable early detection of potential suspected cases. It should include temporary isolation capacity, referral ambulance, trained staff, protocols, and all needed supplies. Screening area can be set up in existing facilities, built as new construction, or using semi-permanent structures such as tents of different sizes. The proposed layout is based on the standard screening setting endorsed with proper infection prevention and control measures regarding ventilation. It describes the basic structure principles and essential services. 1. Patient entry. This is where the patient accesses the health facility. It is essential that all patients should pass through the triage. At this point, anybody arriving should receive a mask, perform hand hygiene, and be directed to the waiting room. The waiting room should be composed of different individual booths with separate entrances and exits and be completely open in order to allow good natural ventilation. 3. Toilets for patients, both male and female, should be nearby. Right from the waiting room, patients should access the screening area, which is divided into two zones, one for the patient and another for staff. This spatial separation allows staff to screen a patient without wearing any personal protective equipment. After the screening, patients can either be moved direct to the health facility if the case definition is not met, or be kept in a temporary isolation room while waiting for a referral towards a SARI treatment center. This is the representation of a flow as just described, with the patient here represented as the blue circle, moving from the entrance to the waiting room, accessing the screening area, and being addressed either to the health facility or to the temporary isolation room waiting for the referral. This is an example of a waiting room and screening area within a tent with a surface area of 100 square meters. Services are integrated in a single structure, but always following the same patient flow. It is worth mentioning that the spatial distance in the screening station can as well be replaced with a transparent surface such as glass or plexiglass in order to protect healthcare workers and rationalize the use of PPE. And here is an example of a screening area within a tent with a surface area of about 45 square meters. It lays on the same principle, only that due to the difference in size, waiting room and screening area are in different structures. Here is how a standard 45 square meter tent, commonly used in emergency settings, is divided into 10 individual booths for patients waiting to access the screening area. Small tents allow more flexibility in terms of capacity. Thus, if required by the epidemiological situation, installing more of these smaller tents to increase the waiting room capacity or installing a second screening tent can easily be done. Tents to be used for screening and waiting rooms should be correctly installed in order to allow a clear and practical patient flow. Module 2B, setting up a SARI treatment center. A SARI treatment center should be set up as close as possible to the center of the outbreak. This is very important to reduce time for the sick to reach the facility the soonest for medical care. The treatment center could be set up next to an existing health facility, or choose to set it up a new place according to specific strategic reasons. However, you need to consider some of the construction requirements, such as enough space in case of future extensions and water source accessibility, the soil condition, and take into account the prevailing winds for the smoke and odors. Basically, some of the rationale behind principal layout of a SARI treatment center are provision of medical care as soon as possible, even prior to laboratory confirmation, in order to avoid medical conditions worsening. Consider the different levels of risk represented by a patient with specific medical conditions, such as severe cases needing aerosol generating procedure such as aspiration, intubation, bronchoscopy, etc. Ensure a clear demarcation and separation from patient and staff areas to reduce the risk of healthcare workers and allow optimal use of the personal protective equipment. Here the diagram with an overview layout based on clinical definition associated with COVID-19. The clinical syndromes would help determine whether a patient suspected of COVID-19 case is considered mild or moderate or severe. That includes some critical patients too. In this diagram, the different colors represents different zones of the SARI treatment center with specific functions in each zone. The next series of slides highlights key elements of a SARI treatment center. This first part starts with where patients would enter from to the waiting room. Triage and room for taking samples are located in this area. Here you have the mild or moderate zone for observation and/or just for a short stay. A ward for severe cases. Critical cases would be treated in this ward. Staff working in the facility would enter from this area, with facility to change to working suits. But also on the middle, you notice the laboratory, which is accessed from here too. Any SARI facility should have a zone for managing waste, as well as a mortuary too. Patients categorized by medical severity are thus mild or moderate, severe or critical, and are physically separated from each other. This categorization by severity means that each ward has its specific case management, as uncomplicated illness that would require a short stay and later could as well be managed at a local or community facility. Severe pneumonia cases, severe pneumonia cases requiring oxygen, and also critical case ward with ventilation installation from which to manage patients, as well as different IPC measures as droplet and contact precautions in moderate case ward, airborne and contact precautions in the severe and critical case wards. From a structural point of view, wards have different types of ventilation. Natural ventilation is for the short stay spatial separation ward. Ventilation of 160 liters per second per patient for severe cases in ward or individual self-contained room, and ventilation of at least 160 liters per second per patient for critical cases in the individual self-contained room. Now let's see the patient's flow. 1. The patient entry. At this point, all patients should receive a mask, wash their hands, and are directed to a dedicated individual booth in the waiting room. Second, Waiting room. A waiting room has several individual booths with separated entrances and exits. There are no doors fitted and allows good natural ventilation. The waiting room has dedicated toilets. Third, triage. Patients are investigated in individual triage booth with a 1 meter distance fence of about 1.2 meter high that separates patients from staff. This facility is open without doors, so it allows a proper natural ventilation and is equipped with dedicated toilets. Fourth, sampling. A sampling room has 4 individual booths with natural or hybrid ventilation. However, patients can only be tested if a doctor decides so. The patient's access in details should look like this image with different services. You see, number 1 is patient's entry. Number 2, the reception. This is where the patients perform hand hygiene and receive clear indication to move to a specific waiting booth. Number 3, waiting room. This should be individual waiting rooms. 4, patient's toilets. Number 5, this is the triage section. Number 6, these are the 4 individual sampling booths. Number 7, this is where ambulances can enter the facility from. 8, donning and doffing. Here is to put on and put off the PPE. Number 9 is a barrier. It should be 1.2 meter high, and this is to identify the patient's arrival area. Patients are moved to the short stay ward where distances and natural ventilation assure infection prevention and control standards. Patients can wait for a few hours for the laboratory results while receiving health promotion sessions and treatment. For discharge, if patients are tested negative, they can be referred to another health facility. However, if they have tested positive, the mild and moderate cases can be referred to the community facility for isolation and follow-up. A moderate case is only moved to the observation room in such a case where the medical department wants to keep him or her under observation for a few more hours. While severe cases are moved directly to the severe case ward, medical care will be provided as well as sample taken from the patient. There are individual self-contained rooms with hybrid ventilation in this ward. If tested negative, the patient will then be discharged through a dedicated discharge room. Critical cases are moved directly to the critical case ward, where medical care will be provided and a sample taken. The ward has individual self-contained rooms with hybrid ventilation. However, if a critical case is tested negative, then the patient will be discharged through a dedicated discharge room. Patient's flow follows a certain logic. It is not unidirectional, as according to medical conditions, patients can be moved from one ward to another. For instance, if a moderate patient's condition deteriorates, the patient would be moved to the severe ward or to the critical ward. Likewise, a critical patient whose condition has improved can be moved to the severe ward and to the short stay ward, and to be finally discharged according to the discharge criteria. Here we'll look in detail in the mild and moderate wards. Patients have at least 2 meters in between them. 1 meter as infection prevention and control measure, and 1 meter to facilitate healthcare worker movement. And if you see at number 2, this is a single barrier of about 1.2 meter high. Although not mandatory, a double fence with 1 meter distance can be used to help visitors respect the spatial distance while visiting patients. Number 3 is a working area. This is only for staff. Number 4 is the place to remove working gear or the personal protective equipment. Number 5 are shelves where you can keep the personal protective equipment. Number 6 is the entrance for patients. And on number 7, only staff would enter from here. Number 8 is the discharge room pending patient's release. 9 are windows for ventilation. And 10 is the observation. Here we are going to look in detail in the flow of patients in the severe and critical wards. Number 1 is individual doffing room. On number 2 is an individual self-contained room with a terrace. 3 are toilets and showers per individual self-contained room. On number 4 you have the PPE shelves. 5 is the staff working area. 6, patient's entrance. Number 7 is the entrance for staff only. And finally, on number 8 is the space for cleaning and disinfecting equipment. On this diagram, we are going to look at the staff flow. First, staff entry. Staff at this point will receive a mask, they will wash their hands, have their temperature checked, and record their presence. Number 2 are changing rooms. There are changing rooms for male and female to remove personal clothes and wear scrubs and boots or closed shoes. Staff toilets are situated nearby. Third, triage. Staff would check on patients in the individual triage booth. A 1 meter distance fence of 1.2 meter height separates patients from staff. The facility is completely open, so no doors, to allow a proper natural ventilation. Number 4 is a triage donning and doffing place. Staff can wear specific personal protective equipment before going to meet patients at the triage. 5 is the staff area in the wards. Each ward has a functional working space for staff where patients are not allowed. You will get more information in the next chapter. On this image, it shows a facility with transparent surfaces. On the left is an outside view of the facility, and on your right is a facility from inside. A treatment center with transparent surfaces have improved case management, but also the relationship between patient and the medical personnel in the sense that there is the visual contact with the patient without need of personal protective equipment. The biomedical devices can be placed on the staff side, such as the monitor, oxygen, or the IV. Flexible and uniform technical plateau for all rooms as biomedical devices can be moved. It is humanized care as there is interaction between patient and clinicians or the medical personnel. There is a huge reduction of entrance in the patient's area. Thereby, there is a considerable reduction of personal protective equipment use. Welcome to Module 2C, SARI Treatment Center in Tents. Small tents of about 45 square meters can be used to set up wards for mild and moderate cases by installing individual booths with beds in it. You can set up a toilet close but outside the tent. For severe and critical patients, private rooms together with private toilets are recommended. This layout is an example of a staff's entrance with small tents of about 45 square meters and the different zones for the temperature screening, toilet, the changing room, reception, the office, but also the logistics warehouse. And on this last slide, you have an overview layout of a SARI treatment center in tents. It follows same logic, so you need to have all the zones, like 1, the staff area, 2, triage area, 3, the short stay, 4, the moderate ward, and 5, for the severe cases.
Welcome to Module 3 of SARI Facility Design course. This specific module is focused on how to repurpose existing building into a SARI treatment center. By the end of this lecture, you will be able to assess and evaluate available existing structure, identify key and essential structural elements, and describe how to adapt an existing building into a SARI treatment center. The lecture is organized in 2 different sections for easy understanding. Section 3A on basic design principle and Section 3B on the existing building selection process. Welcome to Module 3A on basic design principle. There are some essential features a SARI treatment center must have: access and flow, space allocation for mixed area and restrict area for staff only, proximities between these different areas, dimension and distances, ventilation and light, and material. However, before starting any other consideration, we should decide the expected bed capacity, as it's the main parameter leading the building selection process. The first essential structural element is the patient's entrance. It should include patient reception, waiting room with dedicated toilet, triage, both for patients and staff, and a sampling room. On the staff side of the triage, there should be the staff area, including entrance, changing room, toilets, offices, logistic area, and all support service such as laundry, data management, and pharmacy. Third element is the patient's area with different wards for mild, moderate, severe, and critical patients. The 3 elements should allow a proper flow, both for patients and staff. Here we can see the patient flow, moving from entrance to the waiting room, passing through the triage, sampling, which is not mandatory but according to medical consideration, and finally ward, where patients can move back and forward according to medical condition. Staff flow should be controlled as well, 2 different entrances for staff and goods, and the possibility to access reception, triage, and patients directly from the staff area. Here, our space allocation should work. 2 main areas, 1 mix for staff and patients in orange, and 1 only for staff in green. This reduces the risk of infection for healthcare workers and allows a rationalized use of PPE, leading to a significant reduction in consumption and providing a safe place for staff to rest. Some services require specific characteristics, such as being close to each other with a determinate spatial arrangement in order to assure a proper flow both for patients and staff. A clear example is the patient's entrance, composed of the reception, waiting room, and triage. These spaces have to be next to each other in order to allow a proper flow and functioning. While assessing the surface available, we should consider that some service has specific special requirement. The waiting room, screening, triage, and mild-moderate wards, for instance, should be spacious enough to ensure 2-meter distance in between patients. This distance can be reduced with the use of screens and transparent surfaces. 2 meters of distance is also recommended in between suspect cases of a quarting approach. Note that the recommended spatial distance for infection prevention and control measure is 1 meter. However, in order to facilitate access and movement of healthcare workers, 2-meter distance is advised. Severe and critical cases may need to be transported to their respective ward within hospital beds. Once possible location for critical and severe wards has been identified, check the pathway heading to this area to see if they are accessible with the hospital beds. If pathways are not wide enough, check if the area are accessible with stretcher. Here, the minimum dimension requirement for hospital bed and stretcher. Check if the door and corridor are wide enough to allow passage. Self-contained room for severe and critical patients should be spacious enough to contain all the needed biomedical devices and for medical staff to stay at the bedside without any issues. Recommended surface is at least 9.6 square meters per room. Ventilation is a key component for IPC in a SARI treatment center. Different types of ventilation are required according to specific service and wards. Natural ventilation with a minimum flow rate of 60 liters per second per patient should be assured for the service in violet, waiting room, triage, mild and moderate wards. Other services, such as severe and critical patients ward, should have hybrid ventilation with a top-down airflow and a minimum flow rate of 160 liters per second per patient. Some buildings, especially high-density index facilities such as sport hall, healthcare facility, office and school, may already have mechanical ventilation in place. If already available, assess the flow rate, the flow direction and how the exhausted air is treated or diluted. Finishes and furniture as well should meet specific technical characteristics to allow correct IPC measure. They should be cleanable, material easy cleanable and resistant to repeat cleaning, easy to maintain and repair, resistant to microbial growth, non-porous and seamless. Welcome to Module 3B, focus on existing building selection process. Now that we know what we should consider, let's see how to identify an existing building according to structural layout and surface. As already said, expected bed capacity should be the leading factor. This graphic provides indicative meter square per total bed capacity and meter square per patient. For instance, for a 50 beds capacity center, we should consider a building with a surface around 2,000–2,500 meters square, while for 2,000 bed capacity, we should consider surfaces around 8,000 meters square. These figures are an indicative estimation based on architectural standard and previous field experience with other infectious diseases. To facilitate the building selection process, we try to categorize all the different types of building into three categories. Building with a vertical distribution, such as accommodation facility, hotel, student accommodation, school and offices. Building with a horizontal distribution such as school and offices. And big open space such as sport hall and trade fair pavilion. Vertical distribution buildings such as hospital, residential complex, offices or school are usually characterized by a similar layout reproduced on all floors with support services gathered at ground floor. The ground floor could have a hall with a reception, big room for conferences, canteen or a meeting. The other floor have one side or double side room with a central corridor. Bathroom could be individual or public. Here an example on how a vertical building such as an hotel can be repurposed into a SARI treatment center. On the left side, how the existing space are currently allocated, like hall, canteen, conference room. And here, how space can be repurposed with the hall becoming patient reception and waiting room, the canteen turned into staff area and warehouse. The color represents the different area and patient's categorization by severity. Horizontal distribution buildings, such as residential complex, offices and school, usually are characterized by a central hall, office nearby and one or more corridors. Usually corridors start from the hall. They could also host big area, open space, such as gymnasium or conference room and libraries. An example can be a school. Here, how a school can be repurposed, assuring flow and area delimitation. Open space buildings include fair trade pavilion and sport halls, such as basketball and volley courts. usually present wide halls, office, public bathroom, and big open and empty spaces such as the playfield. Due to their layout, open space building could be easily adapted to temporarily isolate patients with a cohorting approach, such as community facility. Big fair trade pavilion, due to their dimension, are able to host the whole SARI treatment center. A basketball court can be easily repurposed into a SARI treatment center with cohorting approach. Here, the example with the basketball court turned into a patient's ward and all the other space repurposed into supportive service. This table provides an overview on area-specific minimum requirement and can be used to assess the existing building once identified. Now, imagine we identify the building. The next step will be to gather all information and technical documents needed to launch the design process. Be sure to have all the technical drawing, plans of the existing building. Be sure to have plans and technical specification for ventilation system, plumbing and electrical system. Then we can start the design phases. Here resume in 5 steps. Identify existing access and building distribution system. Try to find out 2 different main access, one for the patients and one for the staff. Considering the dimension, proximity and flow. Check if electrical ventilation and plumbing system and waste management are appropriate for a SARI treatment center. Check if the emergency pathway and doors are correct also according to the new layout, and decide which kind of intervention you need to adapt the existing building to a SARI treatment center requirement. Using the building technical drawing, we should start identifying existing access and building distribution system. Try to find out 2 different main access, one for patients and one for staff, as shown in this picture. Considering dimension, proximity and flow, try to assign specific COVID-19 area to the existing area. Check if electrical, ventilation, plumbing system and waste management are appropriate for the repurposing. Check if the emergency pathway and doors are still accessible according to the new layout. Finally, draft the intervention to repurpose the existing building. This is the conclusion of the course, and I want to thank you for attending the different modules. If you have any question or you want to share your proposal for input and feedback, you can contact us at oslhealthtech@who.int.